Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today's video is about backstory. So what is backstory? Simply put, backstory is everything that happened to the character before the campaign begins. It's a collection of facts and stories that built the character. But Aviad, this is a DM series! Why are you talking about player stuff? Thanks for asking, personality number 3. The answer is it's not just a player thing. A good backstory is the product of collaborative work, player with their game masters. In this video I'm going to talk about the benefits of backstories. I'll share my view on building backstories and using them at the game table. Let's get started. I wasn't always a paladin. The village I grew up in was attacked by a necromancer. His minions whispered the name Dorivicus, the Undying. We weren't killed outright. Dorivicus took the village hostage with his undead armies. Anyone who tried to escape was eviscerated. They came in the evenings. Dorivicus was tall. He wore black robes and a white mask concealed his face. I swear he was drifting a few inches above ground. If that wasn't enough, he wasn't alone either. He was always surrounded by a platoon of undead soldiers, his personal guard. Not because he needed their protection. We had no weapons that could harm him. He brought them with him so they can carry the unwilling subject of his next experiment. Anyone who tried to help the victims was immediately killed. They were merciless, and we were helpless to stop them. Dorivicus chose half a dozen men every night and left. It was a slow and terrible culling. Days went by. No one came for us. Most of us gave up. I know I did. I'll always remember the sound of horse hooves trampling the ground. The cavalry arrived. The crusaders saved us and drove the forces of Dorivicus away. The moment of realization that I wasn't going to die was bittersweet. You see, my father was taken by Dorivicus. We never found his body, so I can only assume he is now under the command of the Dark Mage. My mother and sisters live, but they are scarred and heartbroken. When the Crusaders left the next day, I joined them. Not a single person stopped to ask me why. Now, this story still has a bit missing. Some of the information required to actually play the character isn't there. We'll figure out the details soon. For now, let's ask ourselves what is the best way to use a story like that in our game. Backstories are personal and can lead to a more immersive experience. By bringing in elements from the background into the game, we can influence the character and the player to care about him more. It makes the player believe their character is real, a living part of the world and story. This makes the game more immersive for the player. The attack on our paladin's home village is something that happened. People remember it. They might even tell stories about it. We can, for example, have the party run into a bar that will tell the terrible story of the village. Perhaps even put some mistakes in his version just to have the paladin correct him. This solidifies the story of the paladin and makes everyone around the table feel like he is a real part of the world. Backstory characters are gold. Our paladin sits in a tavern after a long day of travel. He sits alone and his mind wanders off to the journey up ahead. But something catches his ear. 2 tables away, a hooded man speaks the name he will never forget. Another figure in the same table silences him immediately. The hooded man looks around in suspicion. His gaze meets our paladin. It only takes a name to get a meaningful reaction from a character. That's the strength of background characters. Bring them to the spotlight of your campaign and you will evoke the feeling of recognition in your players. By the way, I gave the example of characters, but this is also true for places, items, organizations, or basically any element of the background that a character cares about. Need a plot hook? What about a story arc? Think about the session our paladin finally confronts Dorivicus. Imagine them trade words just before swords are drawn. Imagine the expression on the player's face when when he realizes that the black god that stands to his right is in fact his father. After the fight is over, the paladin could finally bury him. After all this time, he will finally have closure. The player characters are the protagonists of the story. Their backstories should have unfinished business. Bringing these story hooks into the game session has many benefits. It encourages the player to develop their characters. It strengthens the bond of the party. And last but not least, it gives the players an opportunity to shine. Inside check. One of the characters in my campaign grew up as an orphan in the capital. He had a rough childhood, and the fact that he's a tiefling made it even worse. Years later, he finally managed to elevate his status. Now he's a renowned adventurer with a title that was given to him by the king himself. As you walk the dirty streets of the Warrens, someone catches your attention. A human kid, no older than 10. He wears simple rags covered in mud and dirt. The expression on his face is almost too familiar. Envy and frustration. Knowing his childhood means I know how to get to him. He will always have a soft spot for orphans. That means he is more likely to pay attention to them. They remind him of the person he was just a few years ago. A street urchin is very different from a rich noble, and they are both very different from the player who plays them. Backstories solidify the personality of our characters and gives us a better understanding of how that new person we made up thinks and acts. Meaningful events shape who we are. Understanding what that person went through will help us present a solid image of who he is. If we take the example of our paladin, what we describe is but one event. It teaches us about him. Gather a few of these and you'll have a well-rounded character. Past events create future goals. A good backstory creates motive and purpose for our character. It can also provide it with a reason to travel. A good backstory anchors the character to the world. This leads to the feeling of a real character. Joint backstories can benefit the party. Having some of your players share elements of their backstory will help them interact with us when the game begins. It gives you a good starting point for the group dynamic. I also find it a lot less random than just meeting half a dozen people you've never seen before. Bringing in a new character is easier if some of the party already know it. If you are ever in need of bringing in a new person, or in the unfortunate case of a player character death, bringing in a character who already knows one or more of them will make introductions a lot smoother. Alright, I think that's enough about the benefits of backstory. Let's try to break down the process of creating one. First, we need to ask ourselves, what does a good backstory look like? A good backstory doesn't have to be long to provide a lot. All it takes is a single page with a few well-placed bullets, as long as they are concise. Of course, it can be as long as the player wants. It's their chance to be creative. The backstory should contain any information that is important for the character. It could be other characters, locations, events, and possible plot hooks. We'll get to the specifics soon enough. When creating a backstory, the first thing you do is talk with your players. Try to understand what type of character they wish to play. Do they want a powerful and brutal warrior, a shrewd and curious magician, perhaps a witty and sneaky criminal? After getting a general feeling of the concept, you can start building the outlines of the character. Just knowing the race, class, and subclass of the character can help the DM throw in some ideas as to where the character may have come from. Once you have that, start asking what brought the character to where it is today. Usually this is the part where I ask the player to write down what they already know about their character. Even if it's just a few sentences. I know writing takes effort, but a backstory should be written because it makes it a lot easier to refer to later, when you actually want to use it. I recommend using a shared document, like Google Docs, for easier cooperation. Now is the time for the player to ask questions about that person. Where did she grow up? What was her childhood like? What did she dream to do when she was younger? What events changed her life? The list goes on. One of my amazing players made a list of character building questions. I will put a link down below to the whole bunch for your convenience. Also, there's a lot of good background building questions in the D&D official books. The Player's Handbook, Chapter 4, has a lot of good questions for character building. Also, there's a small set of questions for each race and class in their respective sections. Xanatar's Guide to Everything has a really beautiful section for every official class. Aside from adding more subclass options, it has a set of class-specific questions that really help building characters. When writing the first draft, the player will have questions about the world. Be prepared to answer them. If you don't have an answer immediately, you can either take some time to think about it or consult with the player for ideas, assuming the element in question isn't too significant for the setting. Once the draft is prepared, it's your turn. Read it thoroughly. Try to give them constructive comments. If something they wrote doesn't fit your setting, do your best to explain why and suggest at least one alternative. For example, it sounds unlikely that a thief spent 10 years within a city and somehow avoided the attention of the all-seeing Thieves Guild. Tell it to the player. You should also suggest what may have happened when he was caught by them. This can lead into the two of you now trying to figure out what is the relationship between our thief and the guild. Many ideas turn up when asking the right questions, and after that's done, the character will feel more consistent with the setting. Ask questions about things that require more explanation. You can also suggest ideas for some of the missing details. If you feel like the character's parents didn't get enough attention, you can ask, what was their job? You can suggest something that aligns with some of the skills the character has. A local herbalist physician can teach her son how to discern which berries are edible, information which is vital for a ranger who wishes to survive the wilderness. Look for the elements of the backstory that interface with the world. Characters, places, events, and any other element that you can use in the campaign. Mark them for future use and implementation within the world. Writing backstory takes time and effort, so don't forget to compliment the players on things they did well. They deserve it. After that, the players may need more time to answer new questions. When they do, repeat the process until you are both happy with the result. Now, there are a few things you should keep in mind when working on backstories. First, a backstory is not a novel, and while you can gain a lot by writing parts of it like it is, you need to remember one important thing. The climax of the story should not occur in the background of the character. Everything we write is meant to serve us during the game. A backstory can have a climax, but it should save the climax for the table. Loose ends are not bad. In fact, there should be at least a few of them in every backstory. The character doesn't know everything that happens around it, and neither should the player. I think that leaving some areas vague is a great way of telling the DM, hey, this is a place where I'm not sure what happened. I trust you with the details. Encourage your players to leave a few loose ends on purpose. Loose ends are links between the backstory and the setting. Focus on the viewpoint of the character. Let's say someone writes a character and decides to present a love interest in the story. One bullet in the backstory could be Edmund, a charming man, well dressed and handsome, took my character on a romantic candlelit dinner. My character now has a major crush on him. He's actually a vampire. Let's review the last part. If we drop it, Edmund could be a vampire, but he doesn't have to be. He could be a charming noble, a backstabbing cultist, a Rakshasa in disguise. Heck, he could be all three of them simultaneously. With it, he's a vampire. Don't get me wrong, I love vampires. But now the player won't be surprised when his character finds out. I feel like these surprises make the game more interactive and less like a book that you kind of already know the ending of. Instead, suggest writing some vague details on Edmund's nature that the character knows. For example, meeting with Edmunds were always at night. There's something about him that feels dangerous. Writing this is a bit like telling the DM, Edmund is shifty, he could be a villain. If it's really important for the player that Edmund will be a vampire, and it fits your setting, perhaps the character should know as well. Write a story of discovery and escape. it could make a very neat addition and keep the mystery alive. So this is it for the backstory video. I hope you find at least some of it useful. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this one in the future. Got any more tips for a good backstory? Share them with me in the comments below. Until next time, see you beyond the screen.